Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss the constantly baffling disconnect between the very obvious lack of political strategy surrounding Rishi Sunak's Tories and yet the widely held belief that he genuinely does want to win the election next year. If he really wants to win the election, is there not an argument for him to take on the rebels in his party and do something rather than limp to defeat? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So I was reading something else again recently. It was an account of journalists travelling with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who seemed upset that people weren't buying into his vision or efforts. You know, there's talk of the fact that Sunak works long hours, so why isn't he appreciated for that? He talks about his achievements. Why isn't he appreciated for those? What the Conservatives are hoping to do is to engineer another 1992. This was the year when people felt that the Tories had run out of steam. It was time for Labour to win the election, but then John Major's relatively new administration, a replacement for Margaret Thatcher, sneaked it with a much reduced majority, but they still won a majority. Labour fear the same happening again, which I think sometimes explains their caution, but I think they fear too much. But the Tories are hoping for it. But they're not doing anything to make it happen. There isn't really a similarity between now and 1991 or 1992. The closest similarity is that the Tories had just got rid of a once popular but now toxic leader and adopted someone more presentable. Well, the same thing happened with Rishi Sunak, but it was too early. Not that the Tories could have sensibly delayed, but it was too early. Come the election, Sunak will have been leader for a year and a half, maybe even 2 years. The public are not going to give you the benefit of the doubt for that length of time unless you achieve something. Sunak thinks he is achieving something. He points to the Windsor Framework and his Horizon deal, and he's upset that people don't see them as achievements. But that's because he's not looking at those agreements from the right angle. From a certain point of view, inside the Conservative Party, they are achievements. He had to rebuild some trust with the EU. He had to be honest about the issues. He had to sell the agreements to his hard Brexit party. He also had to do what Labour are going to have to do. He had to consider what the EU wanted in return, otherwise he'd have got no agreement. So yes, from that point of view, they were achievements. But look at it from the public's point of view. At the 2019 general election, there were no trading problems between Britain and Northern Ireland, and now there are. That Sunak has slightly eased some of the damage that Boris Johnson did to them isn't cutting much ice with the public. From the public's point of view, something that was working was broken by a Tory who specifically denied that any damage would be done to it during the election campaign, and then another Tory got it working a bit better, but still not as well as it was working before. They're not going to distinguish between the two Tories. When they go to the polls, their choice isn't between Johnson and Sunak. It's between the Tories and Labour, if they're using their vote to determine the government, as most do. Same with Horizon. The deal Sunak has achieved is not as good as the one we had. Yes, Boris Johnson pissed away the one we had, and so Sunak, what he's done is decent given the circumstances. But it's the same thing. A Tory destroyed a good arrangement and another Tory just repaired a bit of the damage, but it's still worse than it used to be. For Sunak to get credit from the public, he has to make something better than it was. Not better than the last Tory made things. That is not the bar. He has to make it better than it was at the last election. Sunak has to understand that the public are not seeing whether Sunak has cleared up some of Johnson's mess, but if he will do better than Labour with the country. And if Sunak cannot see that, then he's going to carry on petulantly complaining that people don't appreciate him while the public carry on not appreciating him. Why isn't he bothering to ask why the public don't appreciate him? He might then start to work out what he actually needs to do. Instead of complaining that people don't appreciate him, demand to know where he is going wrong. put the emphasis on himself to change, not the many voters getting ready to abandon his party at the election. Doesn't matter whether he thinks it's fair to criticise him or not. Which is easier, to change the way one politician approaches things or to change the way hundreds of thousands of people think? But even if Sunak is prepared to face up to his shortcomings, and there's no sign that he is, it will count for nothing unless he's prepared to lead his party. So far, his leadership has been characterised by a series of surrenders. Last autumn, he pulled the vote on housing targets. This was a Conservative policy. It had been promised. But because there was opposition from some in his party, he dropped the commitment. At the time, he'd only just been made Prime Minister. You could argue, well, maybe what he wants to do is get a few wins under his belt in order to then be able to force through some of the more difficult policies. Well, he's had that time now. He's even had a couple of wins, sort of. So why isn't he able to guide tricky policies now? Take the last week alone. The ban on conversion therapy quietly dropped. The ban on no-fault evictions for renters also disappeared. Both of these were clear Conservative policies. There was no great anguish about them from their voters. In fact, they were popular with most of their voters. It is a testament to how weak Sunak is that he cannot even go ahead with policies which he can wholeheartedly support, but with where there is a little bit, a very small level of resistance to them within his party. It is a recipe for getting nothing done at all, which sort of explains why he's getting nothing done at all. The reason, of course, will be that the party is so fractured that it's really hard to cobble together a coalition of Tory factions to support anything. Sunak feels he can only proceed with a policy which has got almost universal support in his party. But this isn't how the political game can work. A political leader can get MPs to vote for measures they disagree with. They just have to make them see that it's in their interests. In this regard, Rishi Sunak has a huge advantage. He's just too naive to see it. What would happen if Sunak stood up to rebels on a particular issue, like, say, no-fault evictions? What's the worst they can do? Can they defeat the vote? No, because Labour will support it. So what's the worst they can do? They could force a confidence vote in his leadership at the end of next month. The consequences of that would be that the Tory party will look like they're indulging in infighting again. Labour further harden their lead in the polls. Sunak will survive the vote because there's no one else to go for. His authority, however, would be fatally weakened and the party would be in a much worse position. This outcome would be so damaging to the vast majority of Tory MPs who've got a real fight on their hands at the next election that this is a far more worrying prospect for them than it is for Sunak. Rishi Sunak would not actually fall as leader, but those MPs could lose their seats at the next election. Rishi Sunak should not see the potential for a confidence vote as leverage that his MPs have over him, but leverage that he has over them. Back me or sack me, John Major once said. Okay, he lost the following election, but he got control of his party. And unlike in the 90s, Tory MPs know that they've got nobody to replace Sunak with, not this side of the election. Some of them fear the choice they'll be presented with afterwards, but certainly do not want to contemplate another leadership election now. Sunak can use that. It's not even like Sunak risks losing votes and looking weak in public. Of course, he absolutely cannot face down a rebellion that will cause him to lose a vote in Parliament. He mustn't lose a vote in Parliament, absolutely. But a ban on conversion therapy, banning no-fault evictions, housing targets, these would have support on the opposition benches. There is no reason why he would have to lose a vote on it. Sunak can use that. There is no sensible reason for Sunak to have dropped either of these policies in the 11th hour. If he didn't think he had enough support from his own MPs, he should have gone ahead anyway and told them, if you let these votes pass because of Labour, that will make it harder for you to win your seats in the general election. We are going ahead with this policy. It's a Conservative policy. We have promised it. We're going to do it. It's what our voters want. Back it or let Labour take your seat. Not so much a back me or sack me as back me or hand the Downing Street keys to Keir Starmer. Because there's absolutely nothing that Tory rebels can do to Sunak that would not involve hurting themselves even more. And as an added bonus, if Sunak faces rebels down in order to achieve something that voters will appreciate, well, do you know what? People don't mind political leaders facing down wreckers in their party. Sunak should focus on getting legislation passed which would have cross-party support. That way he doesn't risk losing the vote. Yeah, don't lose the vote. That would be really bad. As long as he doesn't risk the votes themselves, put the emphasis on his own MPs to back the moves, or let Labour take the credit and lose some more votes. Normally, you don't want an in-your-face leadership like this. Wouldn't be wise. But Sunak is the beneficiary of two advantages. First, the vast majority of his MPs face losing their seats. That means it's in their interest for the party to look united and actively like it's doing something. Second, there is no obvious pretender to the throne. Most MPs will not risk Suella Braverman taking over, so they will not risk a leadership election. Sunak is safe. Two huge advantages that Sunak has an awful lot of power. Awful lot. Ironically, if he does risk a leadership election, it will be because he's just sat around doing nothing. Doing nothing. Thing is, Sunak doesn't realise he has these advantages. So instead, he thinks he can convince voters to back him, not with action, not by slapping down the rebels, but with his charming smile. But it hasn't worked for the last 10 months. Why would it work now? And like I said, the irony is that because he's not doing anything, he is losing support amongst his party, and he could, at some point, end up facing a situation where they do get rid of him because, well, how could it be worse? But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.